So what I want to talk about today is the title here, and it's a project that Sarah Matthew and I have been working on, and I want to convince you of two things. The first thing is that human cooperation is an evolutionary puzzle, and not just large-scale cooperation that we see in the modern world, but the small-scale cooperation, reciprocity, that we see in virtually every human society. Even the simplest human societies are saturated with small-scale cooperation. And I want to convince you, at least that if it isn't completely convincing, that you ought to worry about the disconnect between what we see amongst humans and what we see amongst other social vertebrates. And the second half of the talk is a model which Sarah and I have been working on, which illustrates the argument in mathematical form. So what's the puzzle? So there's plenty of cooperation in nature. And by cooperation, I mean roughly when an individual does something that's costly to itself, that benefits others or creates some mutual benefit. And almost all the examples that we see in nature can be explained in terms of kinship, or if you prefer, multi-level selection, genetic assortment. So the ants are, at least in the ancestral state, helping their relatives. In some of the modern polygynous species, it's not so clear that's true, but the evidence is that all social insects started out as monogamous colonies in which they were helping full sibs or more in the case of Hymenoptera. This is a slime mold. These are protozoa that live out in the forest, and when times get bad, they aggregate into this slug, and some of the nuclei disperse, and the guys that get stuck in this stalk are altruists. They're helping the guys up here reproduce, and they don't get to reproduce. You can think of, well, so here's our friend, the social mammal, the naked mole rat that lives in eusocial-like colonies in subterranean Africa, has single reproductive and single reproductive female and specialized castes and so on. And finally, you can think of multicellular organisms as cooperative societies of cells. And in the study of the major transitions, we see how organisms went from free-living cells to multicellular organisms in which some cells specialize in reproduction and so on. So the thing about all these is there's a high degree of relatedness amongst the cooperators. So in most ant species, it's something like 0.5. According to Joan Strassman and Dave Queller, these guys are related like about 0.8. This is pretty close to 1. These guys are above half because there's quite a bit of inbreeding. So, and Dave Queller once told me, we can understand almost all the cooperation in nature in terms of relatedness. The big exception is humans. So humans, certainly in modern societies, and I believe the evidence is accumulating, even in hunter-gatherer societies, cooperate extensively with individuals with whom they're barely related to at all. Relatednesses are down under 0.05 in most hunter-gatherer bands, between 0.05 and 1. Kim Hill has a series of recent papers which I think make this extremely clear. The social world of hunter-gatherers is an ethno-linguistic group numbering hundreds of people or even 1,000 people, and the moral universe is that universe, and the relatedness in that universe is quite low. Now, the question is, what explains that? And the answer, the received answer, is Bob Trivers' famous 1971 paper, and all the work that descended from this. Bob looks pretty good for a guy his age, I think, and he should, I think, because he's done a lot of amazing things. But in this case, I want to argue that he's not right. And now I've argued that a lot in the past about large-scale cooperation. But what I want to argue here is the standard story. It's either kin selection or reciprocal altruism, and since it can't be kin selection in humans, it must be reciprocal altruism. That story has problems. And the basic problem is that many animals live in social groups, mammals and birds especially. They've got the cognitive machinery to remember, so they have sustained interactions with known individuals. They can remember who did what to who. And what I'm going to argue is they have very little cooperation and very little reciprocity. And what's more, it doesn't fit the basic predictions that the theory makes. So the basic theory from Trivers to Axelrod and Hamilton to Novak and Zygmunt and all that predicts that, I'm going to argue, makes predictions about other social mammals that are not fulfilled. They work for humans, but not for other social mammals. So what is that? So by now there's a pretty elaborate theory of the evolution of reciprocity. And there are many varieties, but they all come down to something like this. There is a measure of assortment. In the simplest models, it's just 1 minus 1 over the number of interactions. That would be in the basic Axelrod and Hamilton model. And if the degree of assortment is greater than the ratio of the cost to the benefit, so this is the joint benefit produced, this is the cost to the individual producing the action. If this is true, then reciprocity is evolutionarily stable. Now, exactly what's over here depends on the details. But one thing that is always true in these models is that the thing on this side of the equation is a ratio of cost to benefits. Okay? And it says that if the ratio gets larger, this should be, oh, is this backwards? No, that's right. Okay. Okay. Now, there have been 2 recent reviews of reciprocity and other social vertebrates, one by Tim Cluttenbrock and another by Peter Hammerstein. And in both cases, they conclude that first of all, reciprocity is rare, and second of all, what really unifies reciprocity, the observed reciprocity, is low cost, not low cost-benefit ratio. And I'll try to convince you in a second that that's a big difference. It also, I think, predicts roughly that reciprocity should be extremely common in nature. So, this is just the threshold number of interactions number of interactions and the associated threshold cost-benefit ratio. So, if you have 20 interactions, the cost can almost equal the benefit, and it's still evolutionarily stable. With only 2 interactions, it's like Hamilton's rule with full sibs. So it goes from Hamilton's rule with full sibs upwards. So there ought to be tons of circumstances in social life in which this condition is satisfied, and yet the facts are that reciprocity, it should be, this is a screwed up slide. It should say low cost behaviors, and it should say here, I think it's it's there in black letters. You can't see it. Reciprocity. Here, I'll show you. Reciprocity is rare. I converted this slide from black and white to white and black, so this should say reciprocity is rare, and this one should say, it does say, limited to low cost behaviors. So this is what this is what the basic evolutionary theory of reciprocity predicts. There ought to be lots of reciprocity in nature, and yet that's not what we see. And to put some flesh on this, I want to consider 2 human examples. One is mutual aid. So mutual aid is extremely common in in human societies. So this is data collected by Larry Sugiyama, and what he did was he interviewed male Shiwiar are people that live in eastern Ecuador. They're tropical forager horticulturalists, quite a substantial fraction of their calories come from hunting. And he asked men, have you ever been out of commission for 7 days? Because you were sick or because you had an injury, lots of torn ligaments and broken limbs. So 100% of the men had been out for 7 days. 14% of the men had been out for, 80% of the men had been out for more than 14 days. And something like 60% of the men have been out for 30 days. So if you don't hunt and you're depending on your own hunting to live, you're a dead man or dead woman if you're out of commission for 30 days and you can't hunt. So how do these guys survive? Well, their friends and neighbors fed them until they got better. And this is something you see in virtually every human society. And yet you don't see it in any animal societies. So if a female baboon breaks her leg and can't climb the fig tree when everybody else is foraging, she's got to find food someplace else. Think of the benefit-cost ratio that would exist. The benefit to her is huge of just getting a little food, right? The cost of somebody in the fig tree coming down with a handful of figs and giving it to her is extremely low. And yet you don't see anything like this that I know of. I don't think there's a single recorded case, at least that I know of, in any other social animal species. There's huge benefits to be gained, but other animals, evolution hasn't prepared other animals to do that. Okay, here's another example. This is data collected by Hilly Kaplan, Kim Hill, Magdi Hurtado, and others for 2 well-studied foraging populations in South America, the Ache of Paraguay. These are tropical forest, full-time foragers until the mid-70s when they were forcibly settled, and the Hiwi, who are foragers who live in the llanos of western Venezuela, and were foraging when Kim and Hilly studied them in the 1980s. Anyway, what they collected was detailed data on production by both men and women. I'm showing you the men's data here as a function of age. So here's age, and the blue line is men's production, and the red line is men's consumption per capita. And for comparison, here's chimpanzees. So middle-aged men produce a big surplus, which is redistributed to teenagers who don't do anything useful, it seems like, and old guys like me. And the curve for women looks more like men's consumption. And so what's happening is there's a flow of calories and other services from one age class to another. Men are specialized in producing food. The Ache get about 60% of their calories from hunted meat, and those calories are produced by middle-aged guys, and they flow to individuals who are specialized in other kinds of production, child rearing, producing other kinds of services around camp, and so on. And so there's a division of labor, and there's huge gains to be had from that. Now compare that to chimps. In chimps, after weaning, every calorie that an individual gets goes from his or her hand to his or her mouth. And that's why these two curves stay smack on top of each other, because there's extremely small amounts of food sharing in chimps, little meat sharing. So the cost-benefit ratio here is Adam Smith, right? For the same reason that Adam Smith said the division of labor creates big advantages in production. Human foraging systems take advantage of the skills and abilities of different sex age classes in a way that other animals, other primates, other social vertebrates don't. Okay, so who's this old geezer? This is Thomas Hobbes, I think if you correct Hobbes for nepotism, he has it about right for other organisms. Without a Leviathan, other organisms do very poorly at producing cooperative behavior. Humans, as many studies have shown, I've given you a little data, there are many, many other data, even in societies with no Leviathan whatsoever, can produce tons of cooperation. And so my claim is there's something missing from the evolutionary theory of reciprocity. The evolutionary theory of reciprocity predicts that predicts what humans do, not what other animals do. And so the question is, what's missing? And that's the puzzle. Okay, so the first thing I want to say, I'm going to go through this very briefly, is it's not because we're so smart. Humans are prone to pat themselves on the back for being the smartest creatures in the world. And when I can't find my keys and I think of those scrub jays or that can remember the location of 20,000 nuts, I'm not so sure it's obvious that I'm smarter than all other organisms. But it does seem to be true that humans are better at certain kinds of causal reasoning and theory of mind and stuff like that. But I don't think there's much evidence or theory that says that should lead to more cooperation, despite assertions to the contrary. So first theory, here we go, Kelly. I present this now with some temerity, having talked to Kelly this morning about it. This is a paper published by some Irish guys in Proc B a couple years ago. And they did a clever thing. So they made an evolutionary model of reciprocity, but instead of the kind of mindless 2-bit organisms like Axelrod used or I've used in my work, they simulated a population of neural networks playing repeated prisoner's dilemma against each other. And mutations were allowed to make the organisms more intelligent by increasing the actors in this simulation, by increasing the number of nodes, and therefore the amount of memory they could have, the amount of things they could recognize, the complexity of the behavior that could be learned. And this gives you what happens to the frequency of cooperation as a function of the mean level of intelligence that's evolved. And what you should notice is the mean level of cooperation, the frequency of cooperation declines slightly, but the variance increases enormously. So on average, making the actors in an evolutionary model more intelligent doesn't increase the amount of cooperation and therefore the average payoffs, but it does increase the variance. And without going into all the details, this is consistent with the idea that reciprocity models are really coordination models. And they have this, the more complicated the behavior, the more possible coordination points there are, and therefore the more possible equilibria there are. Some of them are quite cooperative. You can get stuck out here, but most of them aren't. Okay, so that's theory. What about data? I don't think there's very much data suggesting that more intelligent animals are more cooperative. Of course, we know social insects, have a brain the size of a pinhead, and they're still doing quite cooperative things. This is data for birds, corvids actually, and what it gives you is the log body mass on this axis, the log brain volume on the other axis. The black dots are cooperative breeders, the open dots are not cooperative breeders, and what you can see is the two lines just fall right on top of each other. Cooperative breeders don't have bigger brains relative to their body size than non-cooperative breeders. Okay, somebody is thinking right at this moment out in the audience, what about Dunbar's famous graph? Here's Dunbar's famous graph. Maybe this is old enough news now that everybody's know about it. Robin Dunbar showed that the ratio of another standardized brain size, the ratio of the forebrain to the overall brain, increased with group size. And the fact that he didn't include orangutans, which have been down here, is sort of embarrassing. But so what this, and he interpreted this as, he doesn't anymore, but he used to interpret this as the fact that as groups got bigger, you had more social relationships to handle, you were able to manage more complex societies, and that's why animals that lived by themselves had tiny brains, and individuals, mammals that lived in, or primates that lived in bigger groups had bigger brains. Here's a paper by Dick Byrne And I think it really shows what's going on. So this is contrast. This is one of these phylogenetically corrected measures of neocortex ratio. And the vertical axis is, again, corrected for phylogenetics, the amount of tactical deception observed in social behavior. So what you can see is as brains get bigger, animals get sneakier and more likely to lie. So, and I think that's what's going on here. It's true that being smarter lets you assemble more complicated, you can remember more about the guys you're cooperating with, it's easier to detect liars and cheaters. On the other hand, you're smarter so you can be a better con man. And it's easier to be a liar. You can be a better liar and a cheater, and it's just an arms race between these two tendencies, and so there's no net effect of brain size on cooperativeness. Okay, so what is it? Well, it could be a lot of things, but I want to advance the hypothesis that it's what makes humans different from other animals is basically morals. The fact that in every human society there's third-party monitoring of behavior and rewards of good behavior and people with good reputations and punishment of people with bad reputations. And I want to offer first some empirical evidence for this, and then an argument, and then we'll flesh out the argument with a model. The empirical argument is that things that ought to be deals, if reciprocity theory basically says, if I cooperate with Sergey, it's because we have a deal. We interact over a long period of time, we've reached an accommodation, and he's nice to me and I'm nice to him, and this is mutually profitable, and that's the way it is. But that's not the way it works in most human societies. I mean, it may work a little bit like that in anonymous urban societies like ours, but in most human societies, all these relationships are regulated by social norms. So if Sergey and I were members of the same clan, we would have one set of obligations, and if we were members of a different clan, we would have a different set of obligations, and we would be expected to do different things. So marriage is, I think, the clearest example of what ought to be a reciprocal arrangement. Males and females, they have this mutual interest in kids, they have a long-term relationship, but in every human society, marriage is regulated by elaborate rules that specify who you can marry, who you can't marry, what your obligations are as a wife, as a husband. It's not something that a pair of individuals work out. It's something that is specified by third-party norms, and if you break those rules, bad things happen to you. Same thing with investment in offspring, or friendship and mutual aid. Sarah has studied warfare in Turkana, which is a large-scale cooperative arrangement, but she has ethnographic stories about individuals who, they go out in small-scale raids, 2 or 3 or 4 guys, and this is to steal cows from their neighbors. And neighbors meaning people who speak a different language 50 or 100 kilometers away. And so some guy's a coward and his friend gets killed. He cheats on the deal during the fight. That has all kinds of downstream effects on him due to the actions of people who had no close relationship with either of them, either the actor or the guy who got cheated on. If he goes out, the one example she has is a guy who had a reputation for being a coward, goes out, he's lost an animal, he's out looking for it. If he's got a good reputation, he can stop anywhere and get fed and get water. If he's got a bad reputation, nobody's going to help him. And it goes on and on. Coalitions, is that spelled right? Coalitions, trade and economic role specialization. All these things in most societies are regulated by social norms, which it's not just between the two or three individuals who are involved in the relationship. Everybody gets their oar into these things and specifies what should be done. So that empirically suggests that norms have something to do with small-scale cooperation in humans. The causal argument is that third-party monitoring enforcement can make it easier to maintain reciprocity for 3 different reasons, at least, the 3 we've been able to think of. The first is you've got more eyes detecting cheating. More people are observing interactions. So in a marriage, if the promise is, I will be faithful until death do us part, and only the husband can catch the wife doing something bad, or vice versa, the chances are much lower that cheating will be caught than if everybody is watching and will, punish the guy if he or her if they behave badly. Second, it increases the cost of cheating. If it's just a single relationship, so Sergey and I have a relationship and I cheat and he stops helping me, all I lose is his help. There's lots of mathematical ecologists in the sea, and I can get help from somebody else. If I cheat on Sergey and my entire discipline comes down on me, that would be bad. And finally, so these 2 things are what I'm going to talk about for the rest of the talk. I'm going to show you a model of this, how these work. There's also, if third parties are, so one of the big problems with reciprocity is when you have perception errors. Errors that, where individuals don't agree about what happened. So I think I cooperated, Sergey thinks I cheated. If we play tit for tat, that's going to lead to oscillations of recrimination. Other models, different things will happen, but it won't be good, whatever it is. And it's hard to get back because we don't agree about what happened. But if third parties are watching what happened, and if they can adjudicate and say, Boyd, you're at fault. So now there's an asymmetry that we can both, a public asymmetry that we can both condition our behavior on. And even though I still think I was in the right, of course, I'll continue to cooperate. And that strategy will be the strategy that doesn't make use of those asymmetries. So that I'm not going to talk about, but I think it's another source of interaction, of a benefit of third-party punishment on reciprocity. Okay, so now I want to turn to the example. And the example is low-cost signaling as an example of cooperation. So in Maynard Smith's book, Maynard Smith and Harper's book, they define a signal as a behavior that evolved because it affects some other individual's behavior. And if there are conflicts of interest, then my signal will try to make you do something that's in my benefit and not yours. That's the nature of a conflict of interest. And so you shouldn't pay attention to my signal, and signals can't work. That's the basic classic problem of cheap talk signals. And the canonical solution is the handicap principle. Okay, so there are lots of examples of the handicap principle in nature in which there are cheap talk, expensive talk signals. So Stotting and Gazelle, here at Thompson's Gazelle, I think it is, might be a springbok jumping up, doing something. So the leopard comes up or the cheetah comes up and the gazelles run away, but every once in a while one of them pops up in the air way higher than he needs to get away, or she's higher than she needs to get away. And what she's saying is, I'm quite healthy and fit, you should chase the other guy. And it's an honest signal of that because she demonstrates that by Stotting. Hammer-headed bats, one of my favorite examples. These guys are lekking. They have these exploded leks in South America, Central America. They hang on upside down along riverbanks or the trees that are along a river, and they, the males do, and they honk their little hearts out, hoping that a girl will come along. So this is a flying animal whose body mass is 40% voice box. So there's another example of a costly handicap. And of course, humans have costly handicaps. This is a picture of a watch called, somebody speaks French probably, Richard Mille, I don't know. Anyway, it costs $380,000. And it keeps much worse time than a $40 Timex. Orders of magnitude, actually, worse time than a atomic. So why is this is a watch that was worn by this hedge fund manager named Richard Tom Perkins, and Tom Perkins was interviewed by Emily Chang of Bloomberg, and he said, New York Times got into a discussion of Rolex watches and why does any man need a Rolex watch? So that's like a liberal me speaking. And he says it's a symbol of terrible values, et cetera, et cetera. So then Perkins said, well, I think that's a little silly. This isn't a Rolex. I could buy a 6-pack of Rolexes for the price of this watch. But so what? And so this is an example of a costly signal, right? You've got to be pretty rich to wear one of these things. And when you're at the board meeting and you know, check out the time, everybody can see that you've spent $500,000 on your watch. And so, you know, that's an honest signal of how smart, how rich you are. But the thing is, most human communication is cheap talk, which is to say that there's nothing in the message itself that guarantees it's true. And as Michael Lachman has pointed out, this is especially a problem for human language because of its open-ended combinatorial nature. It can encode a huge number of different messages. So I can deceive you in many ways, and you've got to defend yourself against every single one of those if you're going to pay attention to what I'm saying. So what accounts for the fact that, in fact, language is cheap talk, but yet that one of the principles of practical linguistics is the basic assumption is that people are trying to inform you usefully when they make a sentence. And the answer has got to be some kind of reciprocity, right? We know that the fable of the boy who cried wolf, a liar will not be believed even when he speaks the truth. So fables are cool, but I like movies better. So I think of this as the Ferris Bueller game. Does people know who Ferris Bueller is? How many people have seen Ferris Bueller's Day Off? Okay, great. So one of the great movies of all times, John Hughes classic. So here's Ferris. How do you fake out your parents? Well, you've got a unknown internal state. Are you sick or aren't you? And you fake a stomach cramp, you moan and wail, you lick your palms, and then mom lets you stay home from high school, and you end up in a giant production number in downtown Chicago, and many fun and useful things happen. So this is the Ferris Bueller game, and the question is, why doesn't actions like this undercut cheap talk human communications? When I say I'm sick, why does mom believe me? And the key facts are there's some internal state of the world, some state of the world that one individual is party to, the other one isn't. The one individual would, in one state, would do something to help the other one, but in the other state wouldn't. And the individual who's potentially to be helped, in this case Ferris, he can signal. And the question is, why does the system work out that he signals honestly most of the time, and therefore his mom believes him? And Sarah and I have developed a model of this based on the Sir Philip Sidney game. Once again, I prefer Ferris to Sir Philip. It's more my kind of culture. But anyway, so here's how the Sir Philip Sidney game works. There are two participants, a donor and a recipient. The recipient can be in one of two states. Probability of the Matt assured me that people here would actually not fall asleep during a real mathematics, or some mathematics anyway. And so here it comes. So the recipient, if he's sick or healthy. And the question is, does the donor transfer the help? In this case, this is meant for the original Sir Philip Sidney game, water bottle, which will benefit the recipient. So if he's sick and signals, it's a truthful signal. If he's healthy and doesn't signal, that's truthful. But if he signals, it's a lie. And the payoffs are if mom here transfers to the other individual, and this is Ferris, mom's fitness is decreased, Ferris fitness is increased. Whether or not Ferris is sick. On the other hand, if there's no transfer, mom is better off, but the effect on Ferris is different when he's healthy than when he's sick. So this A is bigger than B. It's a bigger cost if you don't get the bottle when the resource when you're sick. Okay, so that's the basics of Philip Sidney game, just like it is in Maynard Smith's, whatever it is, 1991 paper. To make this into the Ferris Bueller game with repeated play, we have to do a bunch of things. We pair individuals, and we're going to make them unrelated. In a one-shot game, you never get honest communication between unrelated individuals in the Ferris Bueller game. Okay? But they interact for a random number of periods that last T periods on average. The recipient is sick, meaning needs the resource with probability P. And now, after the two interact, Ferris either gives a signal or doesn't, mom either transfers or doesn't, then the person who received the signal can detect a lie with probability E, so she gets a cue that allows her to detect lies. She happens to be driving downtown, sees Ferris driving on a float. That's a pretty good signal that he's not sick. On the other hand, there's some chance that she makes a mistake. It's not actually Ferris on the float, somebody who just looks like him. And so she gets home and accuses him of being a liar when he was actually sick. Okay, so in the standards of Philip Sidney game, there's relatedness, and there's the sender never knows whether, the individual who's got the resource never knows whether the other individual is sick. And what we're going to look at is how evolution trades off errors in detecting lies and errors in false accusations, and how that affects the evolution of cheap talk. So we need a model that connects these two things. And to that I use just a simple what do they call it? I'm blocking. It's a little ARP moment here. Signal detection model. So he's a signal detection model. Individuals receive a cue that indicates whether it was a lie or not. The bigger the value of the cue, the more likely it was a lie. But the probability of distribution of cues is different for lies than the truth. You're more likely to see Ferris downtown if he actually lied than if he didn't. And the way that signal detection models work is the decision rule is a threshold. So if the cue is bigger than a threshold value, you infer a lie was there. If it's less than the threshold value, you imply it wasn't. This model is used in psychology all over the place. It's in psychophysics especially. So it is what it is. It's a model that captures the idea that that you have that detecting lies, separating truth from lies is a probabilistic thing. And as you become more picky, as you increase the threshold, you become less likely to make false accusations, and the ratio of true to false accusations goes to 1. But on the other hand, your chance of detecting a liar goes down. Okay, so this is the trade-off. You can make, by being more picky, so mom goes downtown, she sees a Ferris lookalike, but now she won't accuse him of lying unless she actually gets out of her car, walks over there and sees, talks to him, makes sure it's Ferris. And so that's the assumptions that this model builds in, and it generates a trade-off between the probability of detecting a lie and the probability of inferring a lie incorrectly. And so when the two normal curves are far apart, then you can get a pretty high probability of detecting a lie with only a low probability of false accusations. On the other hand, when the two curves are close together, then it's harder. And to get high probabilities of detecting lies, you also have to have a high probability of false accusations. Okay, so there's a trade-off. The more sensitive you are, the more likely you are to make false accusations, but the more likely you are to detect liars. Okay. Now we need some strategies. So this is just basically more or less borrowed from the original Sir Philip Sidney game. Recipients either signal only when they're sick. These are truth guys, honest guys, or they're deceptive. They always signal. Donors, if they hear a signal, then they transfer until a lie is detected. After a lie is detected, never transfer. So that's a responder. That's an individual who believes signals but enforces the norm that, or the deal that signals have to be. There's no norm yet. The deal that people he interacts with or she interacts with have to be truthful if they're going to be believed in the future. Individuals here never transfer. I'm going to focus on the competition between these guys. And the rule is that these guys can resist invasion by liars when the ratio of the benefit of a truth teller, the average benefit per term that a truth teller gets, they only get the benefit when they're actually sick, and the probability that occurs is p. This is what a liar gets. They actually tell the truth sometimes, but they also lie sometimes, in which case they get this benefit. These are the waiting times until you're accused of being a liar and cease getting help in the future. This is the waiting time of being a liar. This is the waiting time of an honest person. This is always less than 1 because the probability of liars getting caught is bigger than the probability of honest guys getting caught. And this is also always less than 1. Okay, so what's it actually look like in the model? If you solve the model, sort of, you can get pretty far, and then you have to, you end up with cumulative normals, and you have to simulate stuff, or not. You just have to solve it numerically. So what's on the here is the length of time of the interaction. Individuals interact 2 times, 8 times, 64 times. Above these lines, reciprocity is evolutionarily stable. Below the lines, it's not evolutionarily stable. So, big surprise, the longer interaction occurs, the bigger the range of conditions which allow for reciprocity. That's just the standard story. The 3 curves are hard to detect, medium to detect, and relatively easy to detect. So, when it's hard to detect lies, like on this upper purple line, the range of conditions which allow honest signaling is smaller than when it's easy to detect lies. But the effect is, it gets bigger as interactions go on. So remember that this is the threshold cost-benefit ratio. I'm sorry, I didn't say that very clearly. What's above here is the threshold cost-benefit ratio of lying, of truth-telling to lying, and it has to be greater than these curves. Now, we still have a free parameter here, which is the probability of detecting a lie. And if you simulate this, it turns out that many different values along this line are evolutionarily stable. And that's because cooperation is a coordination game. As long as you're to the left of the curve, I'm sorry, to the right of the curve, this value of E is evolutionarily stable. You can think of these dots as the group maximizing values of E. Okay, so reciprocity allows cheap talk to evolve, especially if interactions go on a long time and it's easy to detect liars, or easy to separate lies from the truth. Okay, so now I want to take the same model and embed it in a world where individuals, which there's third-party monitoring and punishment. So now, instead of just pairs interacting, there are pairwise interactions, but in a group of size n. Each individual has a conversation, talks to everybody in the group, so there are each individual has n-1 conversations. Each individual receives an independent cue for all interactions. So if Sergey and Matt are communicating, so Sergey is is in the signaling situation. He gives a signal. I get a cue, whether that's a lie or not. And it's drawn from the same distribution as the previous model, but independently. So everybody in the group, all of us would get a cue. Some of us wouldn't see anything, but some of us were downtown and we saw Ferris not home sick in his bed. So we get a different cue value, and individuals aggregate their information. They get together and talk, and they share information, and based on that shared information, they decide whether a lie has actually occurred. And once a lie has been detected, of course, some of these lies will be truth tellers get falsely accused. Individuals stop transferring to the liar. So it's exactly the same model, except there's now n times n minus 1 over 2 conversations. Everybody is watching everybody else. And once a lie has occurred, based on the aggregated information available to the community, that guy doesn't get any more, is no longer believed. So the averaging makes the signals more accurate because the variances of those curves get smaller. And the fact that once a lie has been detected, all individuals stop transferring to the liar means the waiting time for liars to get caught is shorter, because now there are n chances, or n minus 1 chances each turn for each liar to get caught, because he's involved in n minus 1 conversations. And so we combine those things and we calculate the waiting times, and we end up with this. So you can see, now this is for the medium level, what was the middle panel of the previous graph. Once again, we have length of interaction across the top, and notice here, when it's relatively easy to detect lies, when you have groups of size, so different groups, this is groups of 16, this is groups of 4, this is groups of 1. So the group of 1 is exactly the previous non-norms curve. And what you can see is there's a big effect. I mean, a factor of, so this is 0.4, this is 0.05. It's a factor of 10 effect on the going from 1 to a community of 16 of the cost-benefit ratio that's necessary to sustain honest communication. Honest communication is a lot easier to sustain here than it is here. Okay, so what's the conclusion? So if liars are monitored and punished, cheap talk can persist. It's very sensitive to the probability of detecting lies. If it's easy to detect lies, then cheap talk is easy to maintain. If it's hard to detect lies, cheap talk is harder to maintain. Third-party punishment make cheap talk much more robust because they increase the quality of the information and the magnitude of the cost of being caught lying. Okay, so this is my Oscar acceptance slide. Thanks to all these guys and my colleagues at ASU, people who provided the money, etc. So I'll entertain questions.